Vanity, self-care, getting right old tarted up. Call it what you will, I am in sore need of it. And that is why I have come to Anthony Laban, aka the Noble Barber Shop, here in Clapham, to see if he can help me out with what is, frankly, a disgrace. Anthony!
How you going?
Very good. How
Good
are
to
you?
see you. I'm all right. Orange hat makes me a bit nervous as to what's underneath.
I feel like I've had to keep this under wraps so it doesn't scare old ladies and children on the e-bike on the way over here. I'll be honest with you, I was talking to Richie from Captain Fawcett before Christmas, and I said to him, I'm going to get a haircut. He said, don't, go and see my mate Anthony. I said, great. He said, we'll send a camera crew. And we'll make it.
Here we are.
He'd really had a great time on your podcast.
Yep, thank you.
So here I am. But that was before Christmas. Yeah. We're now doing this at the end of January. So it isn't even like amusingly like, oh, I kind of need a haircut.
But that's good, man. It gives us something to work with.
This is like Muppet levels of unusual. Excellent. So where do you want me?
Perfect. Let's take your jacket and sit you down. So it's got long.
Hasn't it?
For the months you've been avoiding it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like you said, you normally do a bit of a skin fade. You've gone quite short back and sides previously.
Yeah.
And I'm just saying, I think the top is a bit finer. And I think not moving into comb over territory, but by having a little bit of length, using the wave and going for something that's a bit more kind of tailored, bit sharp, but not quite so kind of boy's own clippered.
Love it.
Does it sound all right?
Like a real man's haircut.
Like a fella's haircut,
like a gentleman's haircut.
There we go.
That's why they call you the Noble Barber, isn't it?
There we go. Well, the Nobles come up as, because the shop's Laban. But we took the Noble Barber for the podcast with the idea that it was no bull, that we were honest, open and transparent. And I think that was the reason it came. And then obviously we spelt it Noble, but we added a bull logo. And that's how.
So now it should be called the One Bull Barber.
Oh, very good. Yeah, so that's how I met our mutual friend.
Yes.
So Richie came on and discussed Captain Fawcett and explained to me all of it.
Yeah.
And obviously that was then how we became firm friends, because I think once you meet Richie, you have to become firm friends, I think. How did you meet up with the right-hand man?
Well, literally went to a barbecue at my next door neighbour's house and started talking to this lovely fella called Ian. And he said, yeah, we knock out a bit of moustache wax as it goes. And I said, you never do. Listen, I competed in the World Beard and Moustache Championships a few years ago with Nick
you
Cave.
did have a spell of proper facial workings, didn't you?
That's it, yeah, the big proper English handlebar. It was because I entered the world of work. I didn't go to university. I entered the world of work and got promoted to above where I should have been at my age.
Right.
So at 21, I was an account executive for a PR company. But when you're 21, absolutely nobody wants to listen to anything you say, and why would they? You're only 21. Now that I'm 45, I can understand their apprehension. But when I was that age, it didn't really work. So I thought, well, if I grow a bit of facial hair, it will put a few years on me, and help me get away with stuff, which it absolutely did. And then doing stand-up as well, which I started around the same age. I think if you look too boyish, and bounce onto a room full of grown-ups, they're like, why should I listen to this child? Which I think you then either end up making your shtick, that becomes your persona. Oh, I'm just a little boy. Yeah. Or you just try and navigate around it. And so ended up with a big American handlebar, which is a sort of Hulk Hogan style moustache.
And this is still in your 20s?
This was all in my 20s, and then basically had that until I was about 32, I think, when I got my first acting job. And they wanted me to shave it all off. And I was quite happy to do that, really, because it marked, right, okay, I've kind of finished just being a stand-up and looking one way, and now I get to be somebody else and look a different way. And basically ever since that point, which was in 2012, I think.
Okay, yeah.
Or 2013, maybe. The facial hair's kind of come and gone on a job-by-job basis as each acting gig has come in. And it's quite a nice thing. I think it's quite a funny, like, different actors have got different ways into a character. I remember Ian McKellen saying that until he was wearing his character's shoes, he didn't really know where he was.
Right.
And I think there's a lot in those sensory things. When I played Francis in One Man, Two Governors, I had a Penhaligon's scent, and even though Francis was far too poor to wear Penhaligons, it was quite an old-fashioned-y type smell.
Yeah.
And so I used to whack that on before every performance. And so, you know, things like if the shoes feel right or if the smell smells right, you can quite quickly go, oh, I know who to be or how to be this person. There's all sorts of ways into a character where you're going to be them for the following 2.5 hours.
I mean, that's a big comedy to start with. Was that your first thing you did? Was that your first big acting role?
So, I've done lots of... basically, when I was a kid, from the age of 3, if you asked me what I wanted to do, it was be a theatre actor. And that never went away. I mean, the idea of it being specifically theatre changed a bit as I got older, but it was always be an actor. And then my mum and dad at one point had a couple of quid and sent us to some nice schools, and I got to one school that had a really big performing arts background.
Oh.
And then we lost all the money, so I had to come out of that school. But the drama teacher there went, no, this kid's onto something, and arranged a scholarship for me to stay there.
Wow.
So, I was there for 3 years, really completely having a scholarship at that school, which did have this big performing arts kind of base. Just meant I spent my GCSE years just reading plays that he gave me, mainly by left-wing northern playwrights. So he, by the time I'd waded through John Godber and Willie Russell and Cartwright and all these people, it was a heck of an education, and a lot of Shakespeare as well, actually, it has to be said. So then the following years were just spent largely not really doing very much work and getting away with it and not going to uni, and like I say, getting this job at a PR agency. Then got into stand-up. Stand-up led to telly and presenting, which was all very nice, which gave me enough celebrity that meant the people in theatre then went, well, if we say that you're in this, you're a celebrity, that'll sell some tickets. So I turned up having not done any actual, training or actor school or anything like that. But it basically turned out that as long as you were smart and kept your ears open, you could probably pick up most of how to do it.
Yeah.
And also, my drama teacher who'd arranged me a scholarship was a phenomenal teacher who really knew his stuff. So it wasn't like when I turned up, I really didn't know what was going on. He'd actually been pretty brilliant in...
Did it feel like a big change though to go from stand-up, where you're presumably saying your own words or saying your own thoughts, to being serious or being on stage with other people's words? Did that?
Mate, that was a big part of it. I absolutely, with stand-up, I recorded. Funny enough, it was. I feel like a lot of my life has been lived with the phrase, and just as it was all changing. But in a nutshell, at the point that I was coming up in comedy, if you got a special on Comedy Central, that was the big thing, right? If you had a Comedy Central special, you were in the gang. So, when my star was riding relatively high, a couple of DVD companies came forward and said, we'd love to put out your DVD. And Universal offered me 125 grand, and Comedy Central offered me less than a fifth of that.
Right.
But because they were Comedy Central, I was like, well, man, I want the rep of it being Comedy Central,
Yeah.
Plus, they offered full creative control, and Universal wanted, you film it at the Apollo, we do it like this, you wear a suit, and blah, blah, blah. So I was like, nah, man, I'm going to do Comedy Central. And literally, within, I think, 2 years, Comedy Central had ceased, like making any Comedy Centrals. Everything was a Netflix. Could you get a Netflix special? And so the cachet of having done something for Comedy Central basically cost me over £100,000. You know, you're always basically trying to work out artistically what feels good versus what pays a pound note. And the problem with the stand-up was I recorded my special, and once I got to the end of that, I really felt like anything I had to say as an artist, I'd put into that special. And what was the next hour of, you know, like deep thoughts that I had? I was like, these are the deep thoughts I've built up over the first 30 years of being alive. I don't think I'm about to have another 30 years worth in 6 months. So, I mean, the funny thing is I look back even at that special now and think, half of that I'm not entirely sure I really stand by. So, you know. But it really did mean that at the point where there was the opportunity to do more theatre, it felt like, well, that was always, as a kid, what I desperately wanted to do. So, you know, if it meant that I got to basically... I was 24 when I turned pro at stand-up. So if the first 12 years of my life were my childhood, the second 12 years of my life were my, you know, transforming from a child into a grown man, then the next 12 years were stand-up, the second 12 years were acting, or the next 12 years after that. So that would take me to 48. I'm 45 now, and it feels like it might be time to do something else entirely.
Oh, okay. The next cliff edge is looming.
Well, it feels like it. Like I say, it feels like a lot of my career is defined by it, and then it all changed. You know? So I presented Top of the Pops as a regular Top of the Pops presenter, not like a one-off guest presenter, you know. But literally, I did that in the 3 months towards them deciding we're no longer going to make Top of the Pops. And
that like a kiss of death to somebody.
That show had been on air 60 odd years, you know. Yeah. I like to tell people it wasn't me that killed it. I was just standing very near it when it died, you know. But I think that's been the thing, you know. I came up at a point where television was the be-all and end-all. And then I was just about, you know, hanging around in TV at the point where streaming started to change everything. And, you know, there was so many cable channels that everything was paying less and less and less and less unless you were one of the golden few, you know, and on and on and on. And by this point, I think that the fame game is built around permanently maintaining a social media presence. Yeah. But the problem with that is that it feels like you're mining your every waking moment for content, or choosing to live a life where rather than actually have your own qualitative experience, you're manufacturing a life that's more interesting in order to provide content.
That's no reflection of actually who you are, what you are, or...
That's it.
Yeah.
It is all branding, and, you know, there isn't a company in the world that's building a brand built on it's what we actually are. Coca-Cola tells you it's the real thing. It doesn't tell you, you know, we're harvesting millions of acres of cocoa beans intensively in North America to get the ingredients for this stuff or whatever it is.
But you kind of, you know, you do seem to have done quite a lot of passion projects. All the stuff you seem to do, whether it's just bounced along at you, have been things you're kind of excited about.
Yeah.
Which is quite a kind of gift.
But you know something? Really. I think that's also part of what's changed in the last couple of years, is that I worked with Sue Perkins.
Yeah.
And she said to me, this was literally in the middle of the pandemic. Everything had been locked down, and there was this window where if everything was, you know, like you can watch old TV shows and everyone's sat weirdly far away from each other. It was we filmed it under those conditions. And she told me she'd just been diagnosed as having ADHD. And I went, no, you haven't. And she went, yes, I have. And I went, no, you haven't. She went, yes, I have. I went, all right then, if you've got ADHD, you describe to me what that is. And she described to me what actually the symptoms of ADHD really were. And I said to her, look, that isn't ADHD, that's just being alive, that's just how brains work. And she said, no, it isn't. And I said, yes, it is. And she said, no, it isn't. And I said, yes, Sue, it is. And she said, no, Rufus, it isn't. And at that point, I was like, okay. So with lightning reflexes, 6 months later, with it playing on me, I started actually looking into it. And the more I looked into it, the more I was like, oh no, hang on a second. And ultimately, because I started looking into it, and then it really feeling like, oh my God, this all feels a bit too on the nose, meant that all of my algorithms shifted to provide me with more and more content about ADHD.
Okay.
So I didn't want to go and get a private diagnosis because I'd previously done some work with NHS doctors, and I've got a bit of a problem with medicine that you have to pay for, right? I have to say, in the last 5 years, my attitude on that is changing as the underfunded and crippled NHS limps ever on.
So it's being forced upon you to change your
right.
view. Really.
I mean, we've all got to start taking a bit more of a view on what we're prepared to pay for, haven't we? I mean, that's basically what it's going to come down to. However, at the time, I didn't want to go and pay for a diagnosis because a bunch of private reasons, but ultimately I felt if it came from the NHS, then I could say it had some credibility as opposed to somebody I theoretically had paid for. Tell me what's wrong with me.
What's wrong, yeah.
And over that intervening year between, I mean, and now the waiting lists are through the roof as more and more people understand what ADHD actually is. But that year was a year of basically being served lots and lots of content about ADHD and being really desperately worried that I was essentially convincing myself I had something when in reality this was just some faddy, oh yeah, you know, you've got a thing and it's this, it's that, it's the other. So I waited the year and then got the phone call like, you know, you ready to come in? A bunch of things about ADHD are quite amusing in some respects. So things like, you know, being organised and task management, right? So I then end up having a meeting dressed as a pantomime villain over Zoom with a psychiatrist to decide whether I've got ADHD. And when he asks me why, I have to tell him because I didn't properly read the form that told me when we were doing this, and I've actually got a school's performance of Aladdin that I have to do. And
so random.
So if he doesn't mind, like I'm only actually on for 20 minutes in the first half. So we've got 2 hours for this meeting. There might come a point in about an hour and 20 minutes where I've got to just run off for 10 minutes. But if he doesn't mind hanging on, I'll come back. And he says to me, that's not really how we do psychiatric evaluation.
Oh my word.
So I did the first hour with him and then did the panto, and then I did the second hour with him in person, and then the third hour, the second hour with him online again, and the third hour with him in person. And at the end of the third hour, he was giving me medication for ADHD, and I said to him, listen, I really have to say, at no point during this have you said to me, like, yeah, you've got ADHD. And I'm sort of waiting for the moment where you tell me whether or not that is a diagnosis. And I know you're giving me medication for it, but I actually just need to hear the words, you know. And this guy looked at me like I was just the biggest idiot going, you know, and he went, but we said at the end of the first session, obviously this is ADHD. I went, what? He went, do you not remember? And I was like, mate, I was like running away to go and say, now listen up, you fairy queen. You know, like,
oh, wow.
And so I sort of got diagnosed with ADHD without ever really hearing that I had. And ultimately, in the years subsequent to that, almost every version of my understanding of myself is sort of fundamentally altered. And, you know, on the back of the pandemic and everything changing, and there's, you know, less theatre being made, there's way less TV and film and, you know, radio and stuff being made. So it's just, this is what I mean about it feeling like the moment's come to do something else.
So when did you find out? When was this whole diagnosis come through? When was this?
So this was January 2021.
Okay. And have you viewed life differently in the last kind of 3 years or so, since you kind of know how your processing works?
Well, it's I think what's become quite undoing, right, is like you end up, when I got diagnosed, the psychiatrist said, you know, I'll give you these tablets, but ultimately nothing is going to do anything other than therapy. Like it's therapy that you actually need. And now, I've done lots of reading about this thing, and there's one of the leading lights talking about a lot of this, a guy called Gabor Mate, and his ultimate, I think, position comes down to, if you look at post-traumatic stress, if you look at early childhood trauma and lots of basically early trauma conditions, symptomatically, what is the difference between ADHD and half of these trauma conditions? And the answer is not really that much.
Wow.
So it seems like it's more of a traumatized person incapable of dealing with the world, which then manifests as either ADHD or OCD or this thing or that thing or the other thing. But ultimately it just comes down to the person you think you are in your, or the person that you're trying to deal with in your own head isn't helping you.
Yeah.
Which, again, I mean, I wonder how mad I end up sounding about all of this stuff, really. But like Freud, we could look at classic psychoanalysis, and Freud will talk about the id and the ego and the superego.
Yeah.
And if you take a bit of a step back from that, you're going like, what? So we've got these like 3 little demons living in our head, or 3, like it all sounds a bit mad. So I don't really know how much of this stuff is sort of ultimately figurative more than it is actually saying this is what it is. But once you've got a model for it, often that can be quite helpful to understand oneself better. The problem is that so much of who we all are is rather built on our history. If you grow up with your mum and dad telling you you're wonderful, you've never put a foot wrong, the sun shines out of your backside, chances are you'll grow up to be a right spoilt prick.
Yeah.
If you grow up with your mum and dad telling you you're pretty good and you're nice and you work hard and whatever, maybe you grow up quite emotionally stable. If you grow up instead raised by people who are themselves quite traumatised by the world, then on and on it goes, and this is the generational trauma that ends up being spoken about, that, is probably best summed up by Philip Larkin's poem, "They fuck you up, your mum and dad, they may not mean to, but they do. They take their insecurities and make up new ones just for you." The poem goes on, but and also I've not quoted that entirely correctly.
That's all right.
But that's what it is, it's when you have a kid, you suddenly see your own mum and dad in an entirely different light. You think, I had them as these gods of parenting who knew what they were talking about. But now that I've got a kid, I realise they were just 2 people making it up as they went along. So,
I think that was always my big realisation when I became a father.
Yeah.
It was like, shit, there really isn't a manual. I really am just taking a guess at it and seeing that response happening.
Yeah.
Whereas I guess, somewhere in you do kind of think your parents are following some sort of manual.
Well, they're the ones, like, when you're very small that tell you, don't touch the fire, it's hot. So you're like, oh, right, these are the people everything. I need to listen to. These are the guys that got it licked. And it might be some years down the line where ultimately the thing about ADHD is that and I remember this very clearly growing up, I'm always going like, so what are we doing now? So can we go and do this? I was thinking we could do this. Hey, who wants to paint a picture? Who wants to go and do this? So, as a kid, you're largely getting told, hey, shush, go and do something else. Why don't you run in the other room? Why don't you go and paint a picture? Why don't you go and read a book? So ultimately, my kind of psyche is built around, if I go off and do something by myself, everyone's very pleased. And then if I come back and show off for them, then they go, oh, that's brilliant, well done, funny little voice, funny little dance, funny little impression, funny little song, funny little... So, as a person, I've largely been built to feel like unless I am about to perform in some respect, then really I need to get out of the way because I'm very annoying. And it turns out that if that's the emotional engine that's running everything, you can actually get quite far.
Yeah.
Right? Like, if you don't realise that you're trying to feed an internal crying child, that's just going like, look at me, if I do this, will you love me? That there's no amount of showing off that you will ever do that's actually going to soothe that kid. Because it's actually, the engine is designed to run like that.
Yeah.
The issue then becomes, are you going to keep using that engine to earn a living? Or as I've come to think of it, basically, if this engine runs on crying babies, do I keep wanting to find crying babies to feed into the engine, or do I want to replace the engine with something that maybe runs on stroking kittens, you know? Now, whether one can do that, I don't know.
But do you have a better relationship with your inner voice now? Now that you've had your diagnosis, you're aware of how your thought process works.
Yeah.
Do you listen to yourself differently? Do you find it has a change on you?
Well, I think the thing is, I've ended up going, sort of understanding it from more of a Buddhist perspective.
Oh, wow.
Which is that voice you can hear in your head isn't actually you. Like, you know, if you meditate, that is ultimately turning off. You know, the idea is Om, right? You know, like zero.
Yeah.
So at the point that you are sitting there not thinking anything, the thing that isn't thinking anything isn't you.
Wow.
Right,
Okay.
I can describe this better, right? You put petrol in a car, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's only the petrol that makes that car run.
Okay.
But that petrol isn't the car.
Yep.
That petrol is just what makes the car run. So our thoughts aren't us. We, in that example, are the car. When you talk about looking after yourself, you know, it's like wash the body, do some exercise, go for a walk. That is the you that actually needs looking after. Part of that you is the voice in your head going, hey, get up, hey, do this, hey, do the other. And it seems like you can probably train that through things like meditation or therapy or whatever. So that rather, I mean, look, this all ends up sounding a bit sad, but I'll tell you a sad story on the grounds it's sort of worth it. During the pandemic, they asked me to do Dancing on Ice, a show that for any other reason I would have stayed a million miles away from, but, you know, I'd earned nothing for a year. And while I'm doing Dancing on Ice training, they send a camera crew and a microphone, you know, so that all your training sessions are basically captured, largely so that if you fall over and smash yourself to pieces, they can show the nation and show you how funny you look when you fall over. So there was the same crew that used to come 3 times a week to the training sessions. And there was a really lovely bloke that was on my crew who on, I think the second week, came over to me and he said, listen man, I've got to ask you, can you not? And I was like, what? He's like, I've got a microphone on you so I can hear it, so can you not? And I was like, I'm sorry, I really don't know what you're on about. He's like, talking to yourself. I was like, again, mate, I don't know what you... He's like, can you not hear it? And I'm still at this point absolutely bemused. And he took me over to the camera. He rewound the tape. He gave me his headphones and pressed play so that I could hear myself ice skating by myself, saying to the teachers, you go over there for a minute. I'm just going to like work this out over here. And I'm literally just ice skating around going, come on, you fucking cunt. Just fucking, no, left foot over, you fucking moron. Just, oh, don't be such a prick. Arms up. How many times are they going to say fucking arms up? Get your arms up, chin up, shoulders back. Right, here we go. Oh, you fucking prick, get up.
Oh,
and it's that over and over and over.
Wow, that's a fairly rough internal voice, isn't it?
Well, it turns out it rather is, yeah.
Jeez.
Anyway, it was about a year after that I got diagnosed with ADHD, and the psychiatrist says, you know, it's basically the thing that's going to improve your life is understanding that your experience to this point has been somebody with a brain that goes in one direction, desperately trying to pretend that it doesn't, and the gap between those two things is ultimately leaving you completely feeling like there's a void, because everything you're needing to pretend to be to the outside world versus everything you are on the inside is ripped. There's just a gap between those two things.
I mean, how do you release from all of this? Because the one thing that I did know about you was your motorbike thing.
Yeah.
Does that you still into your bikes? Do you still find that, because good mates of mine that ride will kind of go out in feeling stressed and lost and and it becomes a form of meditation that you can kind of ride and and come back in a different zone.
Yeah.
Do you still do that, or is
Well, in about 2016, I think, I bought a classic bike. So at that point, I was a brand ambassador for Triumph motorcycles. And they used to lend me bikes of theirs. But it was just as the custom bike scene was really starting to take off, and Bike Shed over in East London was starting to be a thing, all that stuff. And I thought, I really like the reliability of the new bikes, don't get me wrong, but it would be lovely to have an old classic. So there was another comedian guy I knew called Dave Fulton, who had built himself some Harleys. And I said, I understand you've got like a garage or so you can do stuff with bikes. If I bought an old classic English bike, would you help me, get it together? And I was talking in like slightly vague terms, thinking I would love to do it. I wonder, where this would lead. But Dave, being a kind of much more organised soul than I am, just within, I think, 2 weeks said to me, so you said you wanted an old Triumph, what about this one? And, oh, right. So we ended up buying something. I rode it for, we got it running. I rode it for about 3 months, but it was still needing like proper work doing to the engine. And Dave knew Dick Barron from Barron Speed Shop.
right?
And Dick Barron is the guy that made custom bikes for Ewan McGregor and Charlie Boorman when they were doing all their bike stuff. So he said, I'll have a word with Dick and see what Dick says about working on the engine. Dick took it in, took one look at it and went, you are two of the jammiest bastards I think I've ever met in my life. We were like, why? He's like, you see this bit here? He said, that is like inches from melting. He said, if that had melted, you'd have basically bought me an anchor. As it stands, I can pull it all apart and redo it. However, it looks like the last people to pull all the engine apart didn't do a particularly great job, and there are some scratches and stuff on the cylinders. So I could rebore it for you and rebore the whole thing. It's currently a 650, you could rebore it to a 750. So we thought it was a 1971 unit. He took it apart and it turned out it was a 69. So then I started calling the bike the Surprise 69. And Dick said that he had another fella that he was talking to with another one of these engines. So if it was all right with me, what he wanted to do was take the bike in. Basically, was I in any great hurry for the bike? Because if I wasn't, he would take it in and he'd do them both side by side. And that meant that because he knew Dave, he'd sort of possibly do it on kind of mates' rates when it suited him. Yeah. Rather than it being like, oh, you've got to do this engine. And I was like, buddy, I've got to be honest with you. As it stands, I haven't actually got anywhere to keep this bike. I've bought this without really much of a plan. So if you end up having this for a little while, no great shakes. Anyway, that was in 2016. I think I gave it to him in 2017 maybe, and he's still got it now.
Oh shit.
It's still in bits. However, since which time as well, because of working in theatre, getting to any Triumph events went out of the window, so they said no thanks very much, but we might, there's no point really having an ambassador for us. So, the bike's in bits. But do you know what I've weirdly found oddly thrilling? Is that a while back I read a thing from some Australian bike builders, and they were really into building, was it Yamahas? I think it must have been Yamahas. Toyotas? Hondas, of course, Hondas. 350 Hondas. And what they said was, we build these little nimble custom bikes for cruising from the suburbs into the city. And the joy of it is wiggling in and out of the traffic and going around everything. And we enjoy that way more than we enjoy riding through the outback, where it's basically like being hit in the chest with a baseball bat every second.
Right.
And do you know, that made more sense to me than anything I'd heard anybody talk about biking, is that when I do big long journeys, most of them are on the motorway, it's really pretty dismal. I mean, if you get a fairing, it's not so bad, but then you ruin the look of the bike, I think.
Yeah.
Whereas, if you get some absolute gorgeous little razzer that you can throw left, every time, everyone can hear you, so you're pretty safe, you can get round everything and you're gone before anything's even near you, you'll never be safer on the road, And I absolutely love that part of it. So, because there's been so much chop and change over the last few years, without actually having anywhere to keep the bike, there was literally 0 point in him finishing it. But my in-laws have just cleared out their garage, and I was like, oh, could I keep a bike here? And they're like, yeah, of course. So I actually phoned Dick and said to him, because I paid him all the money, or not all the money, I got like one final payment, but I've given him basically all the money to finish it. So it's just a case of getting it done now. I phoned him and he said possibly the end of February. But it'll be the first time I'll have been on a bike, and I think you're right. I think the therapy of that is...
But you are quite a jammy bastard, though, in that respect. I mean, who buys a bike, accidentally finds one of the greatest rebuilders in the country?
Yeah.
You're chatting away. We said at the beginning, when you met Ian, you were talking about moustaches. You've ended up with your own aftershave.
Yeah.
So how the hell does dodgy stand-up comic turning down hundreds of thousands of pounds go via top of the range, beautiful 1969 Triumph to having an aftershave that is triumphant? How did that story go that you end up with your smell?
So you have to remember, right, in the last couple of years, I have literally been on tour, in a caravan, talking to people about my signature scent available in Selfridges. So it's Beyonce, Ariana Grande, and me. We're the big three, I think, when it comes to celebrity fragrances.
I love it.
Well, I mean, again, it was the bikes. It was talking about moustaches. It was talking about bikes with Ian. Because Ian, as well as being one of the leading lights in the world of Captain Fawcett, is an incredible photographer, and had, as part of his love of bikes and photography, been the tour photographer for people doing Royal Enfield tours of India.
Oh, mate.
You do that whole ride through a car. I mean, there's me saying, I don't really like big long rides, but those sorts of things are a different vibe entirely. So Ian used to ride along with all these guys who'd been paid for the trip and take, action shots of them bombing on these classic bikes. And I was just like, that sounds like absolute heaven, and we started talking about, maybe I can come on one of those. So then when we started talking about Fawcett, it really was a case that for the signature series, they wanted each fragrance to have its own story. Ricky had done his booze and backy that was like, if I was going to have any smell at all, my perfect smell is my dad coming back from the pub on a Saturday night. So Ian said to me, so what's your favourite smell? And we talked a lot about getting on motorbikes where the engine's ticking over, and then when you ride a motorbike with an open face helmet, my God, I rode back from the Reading Festival on B roads. I was on L plates one year, and there were all these little tiny villages late on a Saturday night that were having barbecues, and the sense of life that you had in these places was so different than if you'd have gone past in a car in a little, air-conditioned box. Instead, it was you were aware of and going through forests and these deep, funky pine smells and moss smells, and I've done those rides similarly back from when I've worked in Chichester and places like that, coming up through huge woodland and past people's overflowing gardens, and that sense of whipping along with the lovely fresh air and suddenly getting amazing smells up your hooter really does make you feel alive. I rented a Harley and rode around Mauritius once.
Right.
And that was incredible, tropical, tangy, fruity flavours just hanging in the air on these big, huge, open tarmac roads. Tea plantations and all of that. So
that has got to be fantastically good for the soul, isn't it?
I mean, especially in Mauritius, because when they have those enormous, I think that I could be being massively offensive here, but I think they're Hindu statues.
Right.
Of gods and figures. So you come around this corner and get a lung full of mango, and there's suddenly like a 300-foot tall Vishnu. Oh my God! Absolutely magic. Yeah.
Is that taking you back there?
This is the gear, baby. You know, you can imagine just that, just raw through and more.
So it is a great smell. Did you enjoy the process of finding the great smell of Rufus?
We had a really fantastic day. It was Ian and I went and did it together, and we talked a lot about what the smells we liked and the story we wanted to tell. And I think kind of got a bit giddy about it because Ian's partner Lou was instrumental in a lot of the early work with how Captain Fawcett would smell.
Right.
And then for the kind of signature series, they were looking at it more as being a kind of parfumier vibe. So we worked with this guy, and I think basically we just got really giddy that suddenly there was a guy who you could say to, oh, what if it smelled like this? And he'd say, oh, well, to make it smell like that, you take 3 of these and 1 of those. And, you know, it was wonderful. And as giddy little boys, I think, as we were, we ended up with a smell that smelt like oil dripped on an engine that was turning over with these vague floral notes in the background. So it was like leather and oil, like motorbikes, with, you know, and we smelt this smell and we were like, this is amazing. You know, Captain Fawcett is going to be putting something out into the world that nobody else has ever been anywhere near. And the perfumier looked at the pair of us and he went, yeah, there's a reason for that. And we went, what? He said, if you wear that, no woman will ever kiss you. I
was going to say, I'm not getting burnt oil from this. There's quite a meadow floating around in there somewhere.
Honestly, once he told us that, we immediately about-faced. So everything in the Fawcett range is like that very classic.
Yeah.
Lots of woods, sandalwood and those sorts of things, which, hand on heart, you know, I've got dozens of different fragrances and pongs that are all built around those sorts of notes. But because Captain Fawcett basically had all of those bases covered, it felt like, well, if you were going to do a signature series, you would want to do something that actually wasn't the same as everything they already had.
Yeah.
So this is very deliberately the tick to their tack, the yin to their yang, you know, it's the other end of things.
Well, mate, I don't get to say it often, but you smell gorgeous.
Thank you very much.
That is. Right, now we're getting into this tash.
Yes, which, if I was growing out a bit more,
Yeah,
I'd be
I was
able to use
gonna say,
the triumphant moustache wax.
Are we close to that? Are you wanting to hang on to the edges?
Hang on to the edges. I'm going to keep scooping it down for now, just to keep this bit a bit longer. Because otherwise these look too straggly.
Right.
When they're just wispy and it's like a few strands, good. You want it to be a pretty meaty section.
So we're going to clean up the inside of it a
Clean
little
up the
bit.
inside, undercut there, and then sweep this out as much as you can, and it will grow down, obviously, without heating it. And then, just tidy up the rest. It'll be a bit amazing.
Are you feeling handsome enough now?
Honestly, I cannot thank you enough. From turning up looking like I've been dragged through a hedge backwards to now, it's fantastic, honestly.
Beauty.
Really great.
Mate, let me give you stuff.
Richie was entirely correct to send me in your direction.
Thank you very much.
And I won't leave it 2.5 months till I see you again.
I don't think you need that, but great to see you, buddy. Take care.
Take care, Anthony.